We've had a lot of to look at our woodlands in Castine and think about what makes healthy and resilient woodlands, how we might, activities that we might do going forward that would support that and help provide more information to townsfolk about what they can do on their land. We've had a ton of support from the Woodhull Heritage Trust, Maine Coast Heritage Trust. We've had 5 foresters working and looking at the land. This is our second public consultation. We had one in March. We have a bit of a presentation because there's a lot of information to share. And that'll be followed by a Q&A, and people can still have the energy and want to discuss a particular topic or dive in a little deeper, we can do that afterwards, or we can just speak over. So there's that option. So we're going to have everybody just introduce themselves. I've been coordinating this project, an activity in Schomburg, and I work with the town as the Community and Economic Development Director. We'll just go down the line here. Who you with and who will on this activity?
Hi everybody, I'm Caleb Jackson. I work for Maine Coast Heritage Trust. I'm the Associate Director of Stewardship. And I used to steward Literally Woods for like 8 years or so, and the other properties in the area. And on this group, I'm just dipping in and dipping out and saying that.
Providing very helpful insights right when they're needed.
Sure.
Julia.
I'm Julia Gray. I'm the Executive Director at the Wilson Museum, and I've been involved since the application process as far as envisioning and then implementing educational opportunities for young people in Castine as a result of this project.
JW?
JW Harriman, Blue Heritage Trust, here as a stakeholder and forester.
Content. Is that better? Much better.
Yeah, I am chair of the Castine Tree Committee, and I'm the tree warden for Castine, and our focus is on taking care of our elm trees, but also replanting the streetscapes and even doing some pruning and maybe advancing areas of the town for aesthetics and the trees we have.
My name is Kevin Alpha. I'm a consulting forester. So for the last 30 years, I've done that, and the 10 years before that, I worked for what we call the Mill and Old Town Diner International Paper.
My name is Ron Lemon. I'm a consulting forester now. I work for almost 45 years. Just retired just a while ago. Came here in '82 at the end of the last bud run. Retired at the beginning of the new bud run. So I worked in my company, our sales services, as a vegetation management consultant, and specializing mostly in invasive species and brush control scenarios. So I was just brought on just about a couple weeks ago.
And Bill Berman isn't here, but obviously he's been working with Don and working with Don and providing much helpful input there. Okay, so I think the slides will come along. One more. So I'll turn it over to JW to really give the overview of this activity.
I can just be on. So in a nutshell, what we're going to go over tonight is the larger and 80% findings from three forest management plans that some of our consulting foresters have been drafting, and light recommendations, big overview picture for what that may or may not mean for the town of Castine. As kind of an in point, one of the big findings that we're seeing as we continue our work here is truly that all of Castine, whether you're looking at just a couple acres behind somebody's house or you're looking at large forest properties, has some level of human impact. Period. That's functionally said for most of coastal Maine. Castine has a big, long history of colonization, forest use, agriculture, and a number of other things that come into why the forests are the way they are in today's day and age. As I stated, agriculture is one of the big drivers there. Most of Castine, I don't have a number off the top of my head, wasn't deforested at one point in time or another. For either the agricultural industry sheep colonization, or a large proportion of coastal Maine was a shipbuilding industry in the early 1800s. So both things that either require the removal of trees or require the use of those timber products into another product during that age. Some other key finders for today's day and age is, Ron sitting here at the end of the table, that we're on the really truly front edge of the next big wave of invasive terrestrial species here in coastal Maine. If you look to the south of us, states like Massachusetts, Connecticut, or even southern Maine, we're getting a glimpse of how that has played out and how their rural forests that are adjacent to their population centers come up. That's been the big takeaway one. We found invasives on pretty nearly every property that we've done work on today. Kevin will be talking more about that. That aside, there's also been always some level of valuable biological diversity pocket on each one of those properties. And as a conservation forester and someone who just loves the coastal Maine landscape and who's grown up here, at least from my perspective, they're worth protecting. And that's the real driver of what we're doing is this project. That being said, forest management can work a multitude of different things. It can take the place of very intensive, very active, yearly rotation projects for whatever your outcome is, to very light touch or intentional no touch management, all of which can be an active decision. And with that, on to you, Kevin.
Okay, so they hired me to do 3 forest management plans. These are 2 of the lots, and the reason they're on the same map is because they're together. On all of the lots, we did an inventory, which is looking at obviously trees, but other things too: merchantable trees, sapling trees, regeneration, stand types, height, class, very specific species, diameter, crown position, and then merchantability, which sometimes is addressed as acceptable growing stock or unacceptable growing stock, depending on what your idea of where to go. So I did field work, J.W. Harriman helped me, and Malcolm Richardson, who's the forester for Great Pond Heritage Trust, also helped in the field. The first lot we did is what I'm calling Castine Greenbee, which is owned by the town of Castine, but has a conservation easement with Bluegill Heritage Trust. And then the second lot, I'm calling transfer station, you might call it the Public Works Garage. On the map, on the north one, the yellow square is a field, the white line is a trail, the blue dots are small stream crossings, and the blue on the far right, I presume it's blue, looks like blue from here, is a wetland. So there's that. Then this is on Greenbee Forest of what we found. This is the forest as a whole, so the whole woodlot. We have the left graph is showing it. We'll get into the details of what it is, but the big blue is red spruce, just over 40%, followed by red maple, balsam fir. On the right-hand graph, we're talking about the black line is trees per acre, and then the red and the green, which I won't be too confusing about. What you want is green bars. That's called acceptable growing stock. So the more green you have, the better. So if you look at that forest as a whole, it's not too bad, but it is, on the red spruce, it's very good, but the rest of it is so-so. And you'll see it move on this, next slide, please. And this is the same forest. There's the trail on the left if you've never been out there. And on the right, we're showing DBH class and then species. The green, which is the dominant, you can see, is red spruce. So it's dominated by red spruce, which is the trees you see on the left. It really dominates pretty much every class. And then the second one is balsam fir, which is not surprising. All right. This is the second lot to the south, the transfer station, as I called it. So its dominant species is red maple, balsam fir, and red spruce. So similar, but red spruce is a much smaller component of the stand. Balsam fir and red maple are not your normal, what you would manage a lot for. But if you come to the right-hand side, which is more telling to me, if you go back and look at the green and the red spruce is pretty good again, but the balsam fir has almost 80% of unacceptable growing stock. So it means that's something you probably wouldn't try to be growing out there, same with the red maple, unfortunately. All the other species you could work on if you were to do any management.
So Kevin, by acceptable growing stock, you mean trees of significant diameter?
Okay, you asked me about that earlier. So it really has to do with, it doesn't have to be diameter yet. So if it's a spruce tree, I'll use spruce because I talked about red spruce. If it's a 6-inch red spruce and you don't see any defects on it, it could be considered acceptable growing stock. You felt it would grow into a saw log in the future. That makes sense. So it isn't only about size, but it has to have the quality to become, if it's not already a saw log or high quality thing, it will then grow into that. But so on the fir, as for example, fir, a lot of them may be the size of something, but they're never going to become anything other than pulp or cones. That makes sense? All right, and so this is the transfer station lot, just the mixed wood stand, which was the largest, I read to say that this is the largest of the stands that we found. On the left is just a general picture, but I chose that one. The first one we saw, the walking trail, is managed. This is there. Thank you. That is an old, I don't know if a tractor went down there, but something had driven there a long time ago. That's the way I see it. And then on the right, we have the species by size. There is a lot of red spruce and red maple, but red maple is almost the dominant, which is probably not what we want. This is the third lot we did, Shoemaker Preserve. This one is owned by Blue Hill Heritage Trust, so things will be slightly different. On this one, the white line is a trail, and I don't have a laser pointer, but to the right of the white line, there's like a brownish patch. And that is not me, sorry. So that there was a lot of invasives on this property. In fact, it was almost all invasives. This is the breakdown of the entire forest, which really was one stand. The big takeaway, Norway maple is a tree, but it is an invasive tree. It's not natural to here. And then the second one is apple. So there's nothing wrong with apple trees. You could manage for apple trees if you wanted to deal with it, but it wouldn't be anything to do with commercial forestry, for instance. And I can't even pick what the third one is. Maybe one of the aspens or white spruce. And then maybe, you go back one. On the right-hand side, you'll notice almost no green. And I will say that we were probably generous to give any trees green in Norway maple. So the idea is, it's really not acceptable, but I will make recommendations, but Blue Hill Heritage Trust is their land, they'll have to decide if they want to do anything at all. And then the picture on the left just showing a lot of small, most of those are invasive saplings. You can see the patch code beyond, and then you'll note that the species diameter classes are kind of spread out, but a lot more small trees than we had before. The purple, which I think is the Norway maple, but I'm struggling to read my own notes. I believe it is. We call it other hardwood. BM is Norway maple, I'm sorry. Other hardwood could be anything. None of them are very much commercial. It's almost like an urban setting, like your backyard, hopefully not. Okay.
So I'd like to just make a comment here. What this set of slides illustrates is what you can expect to get if you hire a forester to look at what's on your land. It also provides, it's illustrative of the range of diversity on different lots. And while Kevin takes a commercial growth lens, it's still very informative, and he's done quite a lot of analysis, which will be available to everybody in his detailed reports. So it's a nice example of the kind of information that can be pulled out when you do these reviews. And we have some thoughts.
And yeah, so these are just some of the options after, just so you look at the data and all the information that we gather. And then this is just the first pass through. So for Green being owned by the town of Castine, I did find out, so it changed our thoughts a little bit. They have 1993 conservation easement. And in the easement, and so they have to follow that, and it's 11 pages long, and I'm not gonna read it to you. But their goal is maintaining, improving, or extending the trails or possibilities, supporting the old, they have some old growth spruce in there, or older anyway, we're not sure about that. But, and the interpretive signage is something maybe that would come out from this project, for instance. But the key takeaway there is a couple of things. If it's my understanding from reading the conservation easement, if the town, for instance, wanted to harvest wood, the monies made from that wood has to go back to Green Bay property. Can't be used somewhere else in town. We'll have to confirm that, but I think JW, we saw that, and it appears that that's the case. So that really limits what you might do there, if you want to do anything. And then at Schumacher, it's owned by the Louisville Heritage Trust. There's their mission. I'm not going to read that. So what might they do there? They have a trail to maintain, invasives to control. They could do a little bit more management if they so desire. And then supporting healthy evolution. It's not traditional forest management because it probably never will be. It's such a small percentage of the property that they own and manage. And then just for note, you could do something with the apple trees. Food forest is something that's a possibility, I suppose. I haven't done a lot with that, but it's something that's out there if they wanted to. So those two will be limited in what the town can do. And then the third one, we have one more slide. So at the transfer station, you could certainly do more trail work if you wanted to link to Green Bay. Then you do have real forest management options if the town was interested. I consider mostly on a small, like low impact commercial thinning, low impact being the key word. You wouldn't probably be cutting much more than growth. Such a thing like crop tree release, pre-commercial thinning, anything to increase what we talked about, the acceptable growing stock of climate resilient species specifically. And some wood could potentially go into the wood bank that you have right there on the property. Those are all town issues. So I'm just giving you some ideas and some possibilities. Obviously a chance for signage anywhere, and then there is invasives currently on the property, and anytime you do any work near invasive, you're going to have to manage for that as part of it. So we've talked about this. I do not know, it's on the bottom. So these are not my words, these are from the USDA Northern Forest Climate Hub. I just wanted to point out, if you were going to manage that forest, you look at least the products in the good category or maybe the mixed category before you manage for anything in the poor or the fair. So you have to look at that as you went out there to work. And there is aspen, there's a little bit of both kinds of aspen, red maple. I don't think there's any of the other ones that we did. White pine is out there. So that's how you have to look at it. Resiliency was a part of your thing. And I think in today's world, we want to do that on a small project.
So, and we'll take questions at the end of the presentation if people want to come back and ask for clarification. Don, over to you.
What we're looking at as a team is, first, just what do we have here for general species of trees, hardwoods, and softwoods, and I probably got a few slightly off because I'm not a forester, and these guys are, so they can correct me if they see something. But this is generally the dominant species we have in town. I'm focusing on the village here. Of course, the elms are the main focus of the Castine Tree Committee, and our ordinance defines all of the parameters of how to deal with that. And fundraising, the hiring of arborists, we have everyone in the village permit. But the other aspect is the streetscape replanting, which is limited really. There's only a few open spaces. But we want to plant diverse species, not more elms, because we have quite a few so-called disease-resistant elms in town right now. Back in the early aughts, 02 and 04, I think, over 75 or 80 Liberty tree cultivar American elms were planted in town, and The jury is out on whether they're gonna really make it to be tall trees or not, because that's from a particular clone of cultivars that has had mixed results in terms of disease resistance. The others are Princeton, Valley Forge. We also have some Accolade, which is an Asian hybrid, which are highly resistant to disease. And someone has planted some New Harmony on the other end of the court. We like to have folks come to talk to us before they start planting elm trees in town. But they love their elms and it's their property, they can plant them if they want to. The other one we have in town, I believe, is a St. Croix. So we have a smattering of so-called disease-resistant cultivars and hybrids. You'll see how they do. The others, so far that we've planted are a tulip tree and a black gum. We tried to get a white oak, but we were delivered a red oak, so I'll try again. And then the other aspect of what we're trying to do is enhance our streetscape where we can. Number one, the common could use some work because it's a beautiful town common. It's a unique town common because it's open. But there are trees there that obscure the historic buildings around it. I think some pretty judicious pruning of the linden trees and from the library, maybe removing one of them that is not healthy, would help the viewscape from the common and from the library. The pin oaks along the northern side, hanging down almost to the ground, they could use some pruning. There would be better viewscape of the historic houses at the top of the common. And also the bus would be scraping along those limbs. The accolades along the side by the churches, to see how they do. They look terrific at Alpha right now. That's dark green leaves. We have hopes for those. The maple on the corner down by Court Street could do some lining up as well. Just open it up a little bit. The other aspects of enhancing aesthetics in town and controlling problems starts to, from my point of view, with bittersweet, where we have some bittersweet in town and a conspicuous property that really needs to be removed because it's climbing up an elm tree. We don't want this to happen. Until an elm or obscure its foliage from being able to photosynthesize. So it's very unattractive. Some people like it for fall decorations, but we don't want it in our town just growing wild. So we have to address that, I think, from the town level, whether there has to be some sort of aspect of the ordinance that requires people to remove invasive bittersweet is another story we can address. And then, of course, the knotweed problem. When you've heard Kevin talk about knotweed, it is everywhere. You know, it's everywhere. It's in front of Fort Madison. It's all along Water Street. It obscures viewscapes. But the other aspect of that is it retains the land that is could fall into the sea as it erodes away. So that's a conundrum. That's very, very expensive to remove. And what are you going to replace it with? So that's a story we have to talk more about and address. But those are basically the high points of what we're addressing from the standpoint of the town.
Excellent, thank you. Let's pass it on to Taylor.
Use this other way. Because you guys are using that one to report too. Hello? Like a rock star. I will start singing. You'll be so lucky. I did not choose that title. Literally has it all, but I'll stay by it because I like oh, thanks. There's a lot of words in there, and I apologize. So, Witherly Woods is our beloved preserve here in Center of Cascade. It's a big block of forest there. It's owned and managed by Maine Coast Heritage Trust. We were founded in 1970 and didn't start acquiring estate and properties until 1985. This is our first preserve, and it's pretty cool. It's been assembled over decades. Most recently, I think in 2019, a parcel was added. And now it's 193 acres. 4.3 miles of trail, multiple parcels. Every parcel comes with a different story, and there are easements out there, declarations of trust. And beyond that, the land is governed by local regulations set by you fine townspeople, state regulations, and then internally by our management planning process, which is guided by our mission statement, our policies and practices, and then best practices as adopted, from experts in whatever field they're in. But Witherly Woods is just one of about 100 preserves managed out of my office. It's 193 acres out of 12,000 or so, honestly, it's near and dear to my heart because I helped steward it for about 8 years. When I first started stewarding that property, the trees were only about as tall as 5 of us at that time. And I haven't gotten much shorter or much taller. So, use that as a frame of reference. Now they're in their 20s or 30s in height. But for those of you who have been around for a while, Randy, I know that you've been here in this for a while. The forest used to be a single-age spruce coastal forest, and it was very dense, it was dark, and not a ton of marketable timber in there, but there was some for sure. It was kind of, I don't know, the first of many forested tracks to go kind of in our portfolio, but it is not an uncommon story. What's different here is that it's got this beautiful town like right next to it. And so generally speaking, Maine Coast Heritage Trust does not intervene on the landscape unless it's for remediation or to combat invasive species or something like that. We do not go in and haul out timber for any kind of money or to fund our operations generally or anything like that. Here, we got 2 satellite images up there. I had a third, but it was in the winter, and I thought the distance was too much. But you can see in 2006 that dark green landscape on the left up there. That is what the forest used to be. And you can see the trail outlined in there pretty well. And then on your right, that's 2011. That's after a microburst came in and knocked over roughly 40% of the forest cover. We went in afterwards and did a salvage harvest and did a ton of burning of material. Just a ridiculous amount of burning. The pictures of some of the piles and whatnot are like 18 wheelers and just huge piles. We've since found that's not maybe the best way to take care of the material. The salvage harvest is a great way to take care of it, but the burning not so much. We did a internal carbon footprint assessment and looked at the entire operations of our stewardship department. That goes the entire coast of Maine, stewards 170 or 165 preserves and hundreds and hundreds of easement properties. Our carbon footprint was the greatest in our burn piles because of the just amount of smoke and gases that come off of just brush pile burning. So we generally kind of discontinued burning like that, and literally we have stopped doing that for the last, I don't know, 6 or 7 years. And then they students keep trying, but we what we've done since this picture on the right-hand side of 2011, after that clearing, we have gone through and done patch cuts with brush saws. We've done a lot of mowing. We've kept the trails very wide, and done some ribbon kind of fitting in there. And we're selecting specifically for climate adapted species, and really just because of the seed bank that's out there, the sheer acreage of it, the amount of staff time that's gone into it, the amount of money that it takes. Really, we're just picking what's there. So we've kept a lot of, we're going for hardwoods basically. Like any birch, maple, oak just gets kept priority. White pine gets kept in there. But from what we understand of the incoming, the changes in climate that are coming towards, red spruce forest ain't gonna work in 150 years. They grow slowly, they're susceptible to issues, they do not do well with drought. It's not gonna work. Fir is just a mess. It's going to lead to another thick blanket of fir, and won't really get us any further along. Red oak is going to do okay, but it's going to get displaced by white oak. Just things like that. But what we've been able to do is just choose diversity. We can't really choose age classes quite yet, but we're getting there. Because things are kind of growing up pretty well for everybody who's been out there recently. But we can choose for species diversity. That is going well. I can talk about the things that we're going to do along the trail in a second. But before we get to that, one big issue that I've heard mentioned and should be mentioned, and it's so interesting that you brought up town ordinance about bittersweet and whatnot. That would be an intense thing to happen. It would be a huge financial commitment. But it's really one of the best things we can do for our habitat and whatnot, and kind of keeping this as sustainable as long as possible. Because invasive species are much more climate adapted than any other species. They move into torn up territories, which Witherly Woods is a huge torn up territory. Roadsides are a huge torn up territory. Any place with people is going to be torn up and susceptible to invasives. You mentioned bittersweet, but we've got barberry like crazy in this town. It's just terrible. Got a little bit of it over there. In Witherly Woods, we can only, because of the aquifer overlay zone, we cannot intervene maybe to the degree that we would like and what we would do in a lot of places. Because we cannot use herbicide out there, and herbicide really is terrible as it is, it's a really effective tool against invasive plants. So what we can do is triage in the middle, any place where we see invasive species popping up in that regeneration area to try to allow the forest cover to blanket it out so it doesn't spread as wildly. But along the roadside, I'm sorry to say, there are just wide swaths of Witherly Woods that are basically given to the invasive species because neighboring properties have acres and acres of barberry. So if we put in a bunch of herbicide and effort like that, that is really the worst use of herbicide because it's not going to do anything for us in the long run. So if the town took a different measure, that would change everything. I'm not going to commit to anything, but we start talking for sure. I would love to have that conversation. Anyways, as the rambling goes on. So over the years, I've gone out there for hundreds and hundreds of hours, staff, and put money in for contractors to go out and widen the trails, keep them mowed down and everything. And there's a few reasons for that. Access is great when you have it wide and everybody's more comfortable. The ski club out there was using it, and they were helping. They had great volunteers to help that. And it gives Randy and his team better access in the case of the party. They're basically, or lightning strike, or really a party. Wind didn't end the party. But that only goes so far, and now the time has come, and there's an opportunity that the new regional stewardship manager has seized, and I give him so much credit for taking this on, but he's working with MMA to bring their incoming regimental class out early on in their tenure. I don't know what I'm talking about. In September, they're going to go out as 200 or so volunteers are going to help continue the work that we've already been doing for a few years, and they'll be given plots of about 100 feet of trail on either side of it, and they will be going in and not necessarily widening the trail, but removing any of the little tiny scrappy saplings and any kind of forest fire and ladder fuels from the trail side. And so they'll go and they'll open up sections that are densely populated right now, and they will select for the larger diameter trees, hardwood trees, and they will limb everything to about eye height, and then they'll bring all of that brush well, we haven't quite decided, but probably they'll bring all that brush back into the forest, into habitat piles that will then chunk down and compress and chop down so that they hit the ground and hold moisture. Or we will have chippers on site to then, they'll bring the piles to the trail side and then we'll chip it and throw it back into we'll have Forest Service staff there on the day and do a training beforehand, and we've already had conversations with them. It's just a matter of what we do. And we'll do the chippers.
And this photo is a demo for the students of what they are expected to do. So if you go up the trail a little ways, you'll see that it shifts from a solid, dense, scrubby mass to suddenly kind of opened up like that. So that's what the students will be working to interact with the sessions.
Yeah, if you go up there right now, you'll be able to see a very stark difference between that spot and what is directly next to it. That, because we chose sites that will really help illustrate that to the students. And then if you see that, you'll be able to walk through the forest and see other sections that, oh, maybe they did that 5 years ago, because it has been out of the way. One thing that has changed and evolved a little bit is the effort towards removing ladder fuels, which is something we hadn't been doing before. We had just been bending it and making it so that we have a really open crown kind of scenario for everybody to grow into great canopy, but the ladder fuel thing is an evolution and a step in the direction. But at the end, the trail that we chose for this first year, and I will say first year, we're hoping it was going to be a multi-year thing, because what an amazing resource 200 students with something to prove will be. The first year, we're going to be addressing the southeast trail, that line that goes right from the Battle Avenue entrance and goes left or right, because that is the trail that would provide the most effective fire break to the most houses. And that's exactly what these trails have advantage as, it's in part as fire breaks. And so that is a strategic choice to do it along that trail, and then as the years progress and keep doing it, so we'll be able to spread further and go along the northeast side trail and keep spreading out. But this accomplishes multiple things. It manages the forest for marketable timber, or makes it grow so it'll have nice ground density and everything. It'll be resilient because it'll be different species classes and different ages as it develops. It'll have a canopy that will darken the actual trail itself and reduce mowing costs and all that other stuff. It'll create a fire break. It'll keep it open, and it'll be attractive to look at. It's kind of called the King's Forest, because you used to be able to hunt the branches on the way. But beyond all of that, it will connect all of the different important players. It connects the town, it connects our EMS and fire services, it connects the MMA students, gets them educated right as they get here. And really that's like one of the hardest nuts to crack in this whole thing. Managing the forest is one thing, managing people is impossible. So just want to say in this setting that kudos to my coworker for council.
So thank you.
Julie, I'm gonna skip you, Julie, I apologize.
So another exciting issue coming from this.
Sure, so, from the very beginning of this, I reached out and we talked about the opportunity, and what the opportunity might look like to have educational outcomes for primarily young people, but most of these will also work for any age folks. And what the best resources might be about that. We had initially brought Ina and Kevin to the woods behind the museum to see if there was any possibility of like forest management on that and the town lot behind us. And it was worse than Shoemaker by a long shot. It is almost entirely barberry and alders and ticks and all those good things. And so we recognized that is not a forest. It's a giant weed patch. But there were trees. We do have trees. We have interesting variety of trees behind the museum, and we have a relationship with the Adams School, and particularly with the science teacher. So we continue to pursue that as a possibility. How Caston's young people, and I think potentially people more broadly, learn about forests and understanding forests and forest management in our space. So there's actually a really wonderful program out there that exists already, so we don't have to recreate the wheel, that's designed as a kind of a citizen science forestry learning tool for K through 8, K through 8. Yeah, called for the Forest Ecology Research Network, which sets up plots that students, that K through 8 students that do citizen science, they learn how to do it, they also do monitoring, they do reporting, there's a whole system for, as we see citizen science initiatives where they're reporting things in and tracking the forest and what happens in it. And it exists as part of, it's connected to something called Project Learning Tree, which is a nationwide tool for kids learning about wood trees and forests and that sort of thing. And so our Management Museum Learning for Facility will be working with Ann Lodger, the science teacher, to give this a try. We'll help us get the class set up, get the tools we need and so on. And we're also excited, they're thinking of the opportunity to collaborate in Union 93, Knoxville School Code, because to set one of these up, and so there's a teacher there who's really engaged with it, so it might be a really nice way to connect out with Knoxville School kids and so on. I will also add that's not on this list is, and we talked about a little bit with Schumacher Preserve, is that the idea of having a food forest and being able to engage Wabanaki traditional ecological knowledge in the development of that plot. It has quite a bit of serviceberry, and serviceberry is a culturally and economically and historically really significant plant for indigenous folks wherever it grows. And apple trees are historically very interesting. Anyone who came to our Kirkwood Museum a few weeks ago understood that this region has some of the oldest apple trees and descendants of these oldest French apple trees. It's a really fascinating storytelling around that. Castine's complicated settlement history. So we're also excited for that opportunity. And if you haven't already read Rob Montgomery's book, The Serviceberry, it really helps you understand how fruit trees and fruit bushes and harvesting fruit and eating fruit from things wild in the wild is an incredible way to help kids connect with the natural world around them. So that's another place where I'm looking forward to some potential educational engagement with Heritage Trust, the town, places like that.
So ideas are welcome, but I'm excited. Thank you. Derek's gonna just say a word or two.
Oh, yes, it's only giving me about 30 seconds. Luckily, I don't have a huge presentation here because what I'm going to discuss is the community wildfire protection plan. And up on the back table, you'll see there's a little pamphlet I made based on a press release that the 9-town peninsula communities that are participating in this wildfire study put together. And there's a QR code and a link. It's up on Facebook. It isn't up on the town website. It will be soon. If there's anything that you can do before the study would be to take 10 minutes or whatever it is to actually fill out the survey, because it will help the consultants. This project's in its infancy. Literally, this is the first steps. We're starting to talk about what we're going to put on our maps, what data we're going to collect. Overall focus is fire prevention, hazard mitigation, emergency preparedness, and coordinated response. So what that means is trying to teach people, clear safety zones around their houses so it's not densely forested or there's not a lot of invasives that can burn on the ground. And also where the water sources are, where the water sources should be, creating a resource for our fellow communities. So if we have to go in and fight a wildfire in those communities, that we kind of know where the trails or access points are, the water sources, and so basically we have a fighting chance of knocking down that fire and saving valuable properties, which is also part of it. We do have a beautiful community. We want to try to prevent any wildfires from spreading. And we've noticed that wildfires have been breaking out most recently, like in Orrington and Bucksport, along the power line, get into the woods there, burn down some valuable acreage there. So that's something we want to prevent. We do have Witherly Woods here right on Neck, which is an important thing to also look at. So please fill out the survey, look for it, take one of these, scan it with your phone, and we'll be having an actual public forum in the next month or so that will be dealing with this whole study for the town of Casco and some of the other communities. And we're going to bring it on the road to, I think, 3 or 4 other communities over the next few months. So that's all I have to say.
Excellent. So, do you have any questions for any of our first 12 presenters here? Anything that wasn't clear or questions that you have?
Sure, I have one. In Greenview, there's a lot of trees now. Is there some plan for the town of Casco to clean up some of that fire in there that might burn up in the fire Greenview? It looks like a couple of microbes hid in there and there's trees just laying around.
Did you guys notice?
Would somebody please repeat the question?
Yeah, repeat the question.
She asked about Greenview. There's a lot of down trees and potential, I guess, forest fire feed, if you will, and if there's a plan to address that. Or how best to address that.
So probably there is no plan, so it's town-owned, managed under the conservation easement. Typically, trees in a closed canopy forest like you see out there that die on their own, it's very expensive to go clean them up. And that's typically not the high end of fire hazard like you might think. I can't guarantee it, but typically those trees that you see out there would not be a fire hazard. In a typical, like what Caleb was talking about, what we call a low brush small things, so they're full-grown trees that have gone out. But I can't guarantee that. But I'm just saying that typically it's not a plan because it would be only an expense. So somebody would have to pay for that. If you wanted to, for instance, go out there and you could grind them up, obviously concerned about fire, I don't think we do with burning anything, especially on a full-size tree that has fallen down. So I will say at this point, probably not.
Were you talking just about the withering woods or?
No, she asked about Greenview, but this would be true of any area that the management plan. You asked specifically about Greenview because there's a trail, I'm sure you've walked on it and seen, there's a lot of old blowdown out there, that's for sure.
Well, my group went through that whole section and took out a large portion of our woods and we had a logger come in and log them all.
Well, I think, I don't know when it happened, that was before, we see it on the report, that we see the holes, and I guess, I'm pointing at JW because it is theirs to manage, because it is under conservation easement, but if the town wanted to expense and clean up, I think at this point you're beyond any salvage. I don't know, if you've done the salvage right after the blowdown or close to it, you might have been okay, but when I was out there, JW did a lot of the cruising, we did not identify something that should be salvaged and make money in the short term, meaning that everything has gone by salvageable trees.
I've got a question, follow-up question. So the trust seems, with talking about Wooded Woods, the trust seems to be concerned about aesthetics, largely aesthetics, and then future trees. Going back to Greenview, there seems to be zero concern about that. And Greenview isn't the only area of trust property that has that problem. It just seems to be certain woods take precedence over spending a little bit of some money. I don't know what a little bit is, okay? I apologize for that.
I'll give it a good 2 minutes on my standpoint from Greenville Heritage Trust, and I'll hand it over to Caleb.
Pick that microphone, that microphone is, yeah.
Anyway, scale, I would say becomes a big point, whether the woods handled, correct me if I'm wrong, Caleb, quite significant microburst, whether you say 40% of the stands were affected. What we saw in Greenview was really what I would identify as patch disturbance, which for our coastal spruce forests is part of the natural regeneration point. I'd also comment on a large downward debris, we're talking about might not apply necessarily to ladder fields, we're talking about large logs, large trees, have a very outsourced ecological impact in the forest. And almost all of our forests are very downwind debris poor, where they would not necessarily be. Also noted downwind debris holds water really well. So if we're thinking about fire mitigation, wet downwind debris is fire mitigation. Big piles of dry timber, not so much, but that's not what we saw. It was very indicative of patch disturbance, classic for that forest area. Sorry.
No, that's good. I would add to that, the difference between those two lots is proximity to people and concern and the use. So I mentioned that Witherley is 193 acres and we manage like 12,000 something out of my office. The reason I mentioned that is because there is a lot out there to manage actively if you want to take an active stance on things. And generally speaking, we do not intervene. We have plenty of acres, thousands probably of acres that have been knocked over and would look like kind of like Witherley did after the microburst. We're not going to go out there and actually do anything about it. And typically, our stance is to allow something to burn. Where that is not the stance is when it is next to people and next to population centers or sensitive features like that. But thinking of Marshall Island, it's like 1,000 acres. A lot of it has fallen over, and we do get calls from people to say like, hey, clean up your forest. Like, why doesn't it look, like there are down trees everywhere? And it's okay. It's good habitat. My concern there on Marshall wouldn't be fire. Let it burn. The concern would actually be invasive species repopulating that area because they are going to move faster than a regenerating forest. And so we do have invasive species out there now. So that is actually.
The recording.
I have three small questions. Of course, I want to tell you. Yes, I'll do that. Start. No. I have three small questions at the end. You can remember all three. But I want to say, one, I'm very happy to hear all the things you're talking about. I'm here to learn, not to criticize. I'm absolutely so happy to see this interest in the forest and also I see a division between the trees in town, which has slightly different purpose, and other places, the green leaves and so forth, and especially Witherley Woods. I have been in to see Randy at times saying, what are you doing about Witherley Woods? The fire over there and burned down the town. Western within 2 months of drought, we would be in bad shape. And I'm so glad to hear that you're addressing it in a number of ways in that area. But what I'm so glad to want to hear about the community plan for you in the area, because it's what I'm coming from. I've been in this town since the 60s. I bought properties here since 1976. I obviously are not from here. I did a big door that lobster meeting I was waiting. As if I can tell you. But I come from Sweden. And Sweden have treasured and treated and handled their forests like in Asia. And it's kind of built in and every Sweden concern. I have done a lot of orienteering running in forests since I was 8 or 10. My father was especially for that. And I also have cross-country skiing all over, north to south, on timber woods, on timber trails. Boy, I love timber trails. When I first came here, there were timber trails. There was a lady here who was also a postmistress who had a horse, and she said, where do you ride? I come from Virginia right now. She said, oh, there are timber trails everywhere. We can go all over. I said, oh, I didn't get it. But the concern over, I remember when I was little, there were always fire lanes. And I'm sure I was practicing Bangor and all to protect it. But then they stopped with that. I don't know why. And the lookout towers everywhere. But also the Swedish forest, and even some more than they were tall trees with very little undergrowth. but it can only go good by the mushrooms and the mosses and the small plants that allow the deer and the elk and the big one, and what is called elk, but the big one, the moose. Anyway, so I would like to learn more from you what planning is about. I couldn't think out of things because I have very nice and echo in this room. But what I want to know when you describe the different areas, how much of the forest here, particularly green in the like that kind of woodlands, really, how much is old growth? I work with Great Pond Mountain and with foresters who work with that. My husband and I often trade, making over the trees for the waterline things which was on. Okay, and so do you have to find much old growth? I would say not, because this island, Peninsula, was totally naked back in those days. And two things, everybody needed the wood locally to burn and keep warm in winter. They built ships like crazy because they had mass ships back to Europe. These forests were totally used. And the other thing is you can't run a farm, a mountain, you don't take away the trees. So I cry every time I see meadows that were open by people who would lost that material, right? Go over the mountains, people plant trees everywhere. I think trees belong in the forest and they're different forests. That's my next question. This one. What are the purposes again of the forest that you have described tonight? I think they're different. When you say commercial, then I think, locally, which is nothing wrong with it, it's done right. You descend the forest, etc. I mean, there's no clear cutting around here, I'm sure. Maybe. Do you plant any trees? So, what are you planting for? Old forest. And what age are these big pieces of that? And
I think that's your answer.
Thank you so much for listening to me. And I hope you can hear me and understand.
You said a lot there, so I'm glad you're here. But as a non-forester, I want to interject before forester starts talking, because I feel like it's a really hard thing to get an answer out of this, but the pre-commercial thinning and those kinds of terms are academic terms to describe the characteristics of a forest that they are in the process of intervening and creating. It does not necessarily mean that anything's going to be cut and harvested for profits or for materials, the forest products to use or anything like that.
I'm here to go.
And so like it took me a while to tease that out of the forester as well, because I went to art school, I had to learn on the job. So, I broadcast school. It's so weird. But yeah, so I'll just say that, and we don't have many with forest characteristics anywhere around here. Everything has been turned up a lot, and so we are entering into a new phase. This was a very rural agrarian area. In rural agrarian areas, they will need to rely economically on the land to produce, income and whatnot, and that is changing. And so we have abandoned forest types and different approaches, and now we're starting to get into it a little bit more. We've got educated types like these coming in here and start to help us plan things a little bit different. I'll let somebody with a degree say.
Maybe just touch on, are you recommending planting? Is one of the questions. Yeah, planting. I can go respond to that.
I'll address planting, and I'll keep it very brief. As far as forest practices, forest management in New England, for pretty much up to date, we had what was generally considered a magic forest, in the sense that you could do something of anything and you would get trees back. The understanding going forward is that with climate change may not be the case. and that the species that quote unquote would magically return. I don't want to use these words, but it's a good proxy. Aren't things that are climate resilient or commercially viable or check all the boxes that we as land managers want to check. So in a nutshell, restoration planting, enrichment planting, it's called a lot of different things that all look very similar, that are functionally planting different tree species is becoming more common and is catching on, and I think the jury's still out for necessarily how it will be done in the New England states, the Northeast, but it's becoming more popular every year.
I got one.
I think the other part was the planning, and we were asking about the planning. So, writing a management plan like this for a town, as opposed to, say, you individually as a person, which is more what I typically do. So it makes it a little harder, because what does the town want to do? You talked about planning. Will they do harvesting? I don't know. But I will give some recommendations of some potential things they could do if they want to. But they might want to do nothing. I don't know. It makes it really hard. There's the town manager, but he still has to answer to, I don't know who, but however people in town will have to decide. Well, it's probably you people here, but to be clear, there will be some options, and then the town will have to decide what they want to do, how much or how little, or even nothing in some cases, especially listening to everything that you're hearing here. What we're trying to show is we learned what's out there, which we didn't know before. And then here are some options of things you can and may do, but don't have to. And then you'll have to decide, because some will have cost forward, some will maybe make the town some money, but maybe not. It really depends on the markets and all those things. But in typical for my job, harvesting trees comes way down the list when you're doing forest management plans. Trying to learn what's out there, harvesting only and if needed. And then you have to deal with on the other side, we've heard a lot, and Ron hasn't said much, but invasive control becomes a bigger thing. When you open the canopy, suddenly invasives are going to be more likely there where you hadn't seen them before. Does that help? You want invasives?
Since we haven't talked about invasives, I visited the community. I thought it was a beautiful forest, and I had a hard time finding any invasive plants internally in the forest. So it's like you said, it's a combination of red spruce and balsam fir primarily, and fir only grows to about 80 years, and then it starts getting hard and dropping out of the stand, and there's probably a lot of the blowdown, there's probably a lot of fir. So it falls, and if you go down there where all the trees have fallen in these microbursts, you see that all that spruce fir is regenerating, thick, dense spruce fir that he's thinking of possibly commercially thinning it sometime. And so that's the forest's way of protecting itself from invasives coming back. It's creating a shaded floor by all that regeneration. You don't want to go in there and mess up that regeneration with skidders, because if you go in there and do that, then you open up the forest floor to the most aggressive plant. And those birds have been sitting in those trees roosting for the last 60 years, feeding on all the invasives in town, roosting in those pine trees. So when you open up that forest floor to sun, the first thing that's going to come back is invasives. So right now it's beautiful. It's a beautiful, natural, softwood forest. I think it's beautiful. And I think just let it go. It's protecting itself as it is right now. I wouldn't go plant anything. It's been planting itself.
I'm gonna ask you,
Yeah.
that's not.
So I think we'll wrap up. We have a small audience, but there's a wealth, centuries of wealth of knowledge. Just about maybe a couple. I don't know.
A lot of my water, I said, so it adds up.
It adds up. So we'll talk, It was really great to have Don join us because he's a real basics expert, and one of the key lessons coming out of this is that's something that's really important for us to figure out what's reasonable for us to do. And there's been some great suggestions. And I think what's so valuable about what we put together in these reports that we'll have available, even if people haven't shown up, you know, summer, but to have these examples of forest analysis is a nice thing that people have for reference. So, you know, all of this, thank you all of your inputs are well recorded, well documented, and will be helpful to spread it forward. So thank you all, and thank you for showing up.
I'm
Yes.
I want to thank you, because I will tell you right now, this is one of the driest subjects I've ever sat through in the beginning. And over the last few meetings, it started to really come to life, and you started to learn more about, you know, our individual forested areas, the tree species, and everything like that. And I think I never saw Dawn yawn once. The last couple of meetings has been on. You guys know, I thank you for keeping this going. It's been a great project.
Yes.